So this guide will be split into 4 parts and it's going to go pretty fast. What you need to know, then what you should do, explanations on why you're doing those things, and then finally what extra things you can do to get good. Starting off with talents, this is where you're at. Rows 30 and 45 are free reign, you can choose whatever you like, but these are where my preferences are at. The remainder of the choices in this tree aren't really choices at all. You may find some builds later on when you're playing the spec, but I think considering anything else in any of those niche builds right now would be a mistake. And your 24/7 Soulbind will be Merilith as laid out here. The build I'll be outlining works best with Necrolord, so we won't be going anywhere else. The legendary and covenant pairing of choice is PLA or Primal Lava Actuators, which is a banger name by the way. Used with Necrolord and of course Unity Legendary. You can slap Haste Mastery on both legendaries and be fine, and you can also slap Haste Verse on them and be fine. It all kind of depends on if you just want to deal damage or if you want to PvP sometimes, Haste Verse might be better. I'm not going to talk about stats, gear, best in slot or anything like that for the rest of this guide, sim yourself. And if you just remember you use 2 agility one-handers and half the reason you exist is to drop Wind Fury, you're good to go. Just make sure you're using your own Wind Fury weapon and Flame Tongue weapon enhancers, not oil or sharpening stones. And if you weren't aware, Enhance uses Maelstrom as its resource. It's as simple as you build 5 stacks by attacking stuff on an RNG, and you can consume those 5 stacks to make your next spell that would be a cast instead not cast and be instant and hit much harder thanks to this conduit. Now before we actually get into gameplay, take a look here at what your damage breakdown will look like throughout a given key. Note that you don't have one single ability that's hard carrying your damage per se. Your top damage dealers are Lava Lash and Flame Shock, and notice Lava Lash has hundreds of hits over a 20-minute key, and Flame Shock is of course a dot, so all its damage will come with time and maintenance. My point here really being that Enhance isn't going to show up and be a class that can rip all its damage in the first 10 seconds and then effectively go AFK and your performance won't be affected. It's the exact opposite. The class is going to be heavily punished by losing uptime and heavily punished by mobs not being properly grouped up. And as you can see, even if you scroll down in the damage breakdown, you have a lot of small things that constitute a decent chunk of damage. Like ignoring any 1 or 2 of these things or mismanagement can easily cost you a few percent here and there that will eventually add up to like 20 or 30% loss. Now with that in mind, this is how you play the class during a pull. I'm going to go super fast here and then back it up and explain later. So don't worry if you can't keep up, and feel free to pause, rewind, all that sort of stuff. So I start the pack with Flame Shocking a target, Lava Lashing to accelerate the Flame Shock and spread it to 3 more targets, and then press Feral Spirits, Enhances major DPS cooldown. I Crash Lightning to start that buff maintenance, then Primordial Wave to Flame Shock a 5th target if it's available, and then I will either Lava Lash if it's up, or manually Flame Shock the 6th target, again to spread more Flame Shocks, if there's even that many in the pull of course. And after that I build 5 Maelstrom, which you probably will have just naturally, and then Lightning Bolt to give me a copious amount of haste from Primordial. Then I Fire Nova, go into multi-dotting style rotation, and then my top priority now is tab targeting and Lava Lashing Flame Shock targets, pressing Crash Lightning and Fire Nova on cooldown, Sundering on cooldown, Stormstrike when I have nothing else to press, and then Frost Shock if you really have nothing else to press. This entirely encapsulates Enhance's pure damage rotation. The only change you'll have is on a dungeon boss, where there might not be enough mobs to Flame Shock, and then Crash Lightning goes to the bottom of the barrel in your priority, even beneath Frost Shock. Now, with that said, and yes, it kind of really is that simple in theory, this is why you do each one of these things. Now if you don't care, you can close the video and blindly follow that, and I'm sure you'll have some degree of success, but here's the explanations on how things work and why you do what you do. Now when I entered the pull, I Flame Shock first because the entire build revolves around Flame Shock damage, targets having Flame Shock, and the interactions with Flame Shock. So my legendary, PLA needs Flame Shock hits. These 2 talents require Flame Shock on targets to even function. Unless the pull is extremely large or you get really bad luck, you don't have to press Flame Shock ever again for the rest of the pull. Assuming you keep your 1-hour weapon enhancer buffs up, Flame Tongue weapon will cause your Lava Lash to spread Flame Shock to 3 targets. Not an RNG, every single time you Lava Lash a Flame Shock target, it'll spread. And a Lava Lash is your highest priority ability, so Flame Shock will end up taking care of itself 99.9% of the time. Next, after we establish Flame Shock on a few targets, which was the setup, we'll move into the buffs. We pop Feral Spirits because it just straight up improves our damage. The dogs attack targets, they debuff them to take more damage, they generate more resource, and then they completely are fire and forget. Min-maxing this or trying to track the buffs that the dogs apply is a great mistake early on. You can probably do that much like hundreds of hours later on in your gameplay as Enhanced, but doing that early is a fool's errand. Because Feral Spirits is so fire and forget and such a low cooldown, you never really hold it. Now after that's up, we Crash Lightning for another buff, because if you hit 2 targets with Crash Lightning, at least, this will make your Lava Lash and Stormstrike cleave AoE frontal damage. So we get that up first. And from now on, you press Crash Lightning on cooldown and AoE. On a boss or any single target mob, Crash Lightning is bottom of the barrel dog shit. it doesn't do much damage at all on single target, and its buff doesn't even apply unless you hit 2 targets, so it makes it irrelevant entirely. Then our next big buff to acquire is a massive amount of haste from our Unity. We Primordial Wave a new target in the pack if it's available to have Flame Shock added. If not, you can just toss it on your main target. The actual Primordial Wave itself isn't important, it's the secondary effect. Because Primordial Wave makes your next Lightning Bolt hit all targets with Flame Shock. Again, another interaction with Flame Shock. So when you Primordial Wave in this pull, you should already have your 5 Maelstrom from the opener, the Flame Shock, Lava Lash, and the dogs. Then, as soon as you Primordial Wave, you Lightning Bolt and it'll hit all the targets, give you 10% haste per target because of Unity. At this moment, all our buffs are up and our damage is going to begin. Fire Nova, simply because it does lots of damage, again, another Flame Shock ability. Sundering for the same reason, and then to maintain damage, we tab target to our Flame Shock targets, which should be every mob, and we Lava Lash it on cooldown, then tab to a new one. This allows us to maintain Lashing Flames, this talent, which doubles Flame Shock's potency. The reason we do this is because there's a multiplicative buff with Flame Shock getting buffed from the haste of Primordial Wave, which makes it tick faster, paired with Lashing Flames, which makes Flame Shock hit twice as hard, making critical Flame Shock hits effectively 4 times its original base damage, and ticking more frequently. We also have a conduit that buffs Lava Lash's crit chance against Flame Shock targets, and as you remember from the damage breakdown, Lava Lash is your hardest hitting ability. Then once this level of setup is acquired, the spec becomes very rhythmic. You maintain Flame Shocks and Lashing Flames on all your targets. Again, maintaining Lashing Flames will maintain Flame Shocks for you. You don't really have to worry about the Flame Shocks once it's on all the targets initially. And then you Primordial Wave to reacquire your Giga Haste buff. You Fire Nova, Crash Lightning, Sundering on CD. If you don't have Primordial Wave available to use, then you can use your 5 built-up Maelstrom on Chain Lightning. Anytime I say cast Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning, I mean with Maelstrom. You never ever cast them because it resets your auto attack swing, and that just disrupts your entire rotation. Chain Lightnings will also reduce the cooldown of Crash Lightning in a neat little feedback loop, as Crash Lightning per target hit also buffs your next Chain Lightning. Now keep in mind during this period of rhythmic rotation that your third potency conduit we haven't considered yet has a chance to reset Primordial Wave. Be careful not to double spam Primordial Wave, as it will waste the haste buff uptime. And lastly, but definitely not the least at all, comes the most important proc and RNG dependency in your kit. Hot Hands, your second row talent. In every single circumstance, after your buffs are maintained, Hot Hands allows you to, depending on your current haste, spam the shit out of Lava Lash. On single target, this will either look like just straight up 7 to 10 Lava Lashes in a row, or with lower haste in the moment, it may be Lava Lash every second global. On AoE, if this proc occurs at the start of a pull, it's an extreme buff to your damage, as it will let you spread Flame Shocks to the entire pack, even if it's a very high target pack, and get Lashing Flames on much more targets than you usually could. If you do get this proc in the first couple seconds of a pull, it's worth delaying pretty much everything just to use Hot Hands out, spread Flame Shock, and get the Lashing Flames up. Just keep in mind when you first start playing the class, this proc is not going to be as powerful as some procs in other specs, because the proc can be used incorrectly and you probably will use it incorrectly. But Hot Hands is ultimately going to be your biggest RNG dependent thing that will increase your damage over a fight, or a damage window, or even with an entire pull. And last note, keep in mind that Hot Hands does not have an internal cooldown, or if it does, it's shorter than the duration. So Hot Hands can proc inside itself and extend Hot Hands, so you can have like 20 to 30 seconds of just Hot Hands. And that makes it much more difficult to maintain max efficiency within all the Hot Hands procs, because there will be times in those 20 or 30 seconds where that's extremely good RNG, but chances are you might not be able to maintain full uptime, or you may get overwhelmed by that much Hot Hands, which is why I said it's going to scale much better the longer you play the class. Well, that effectively sums it up for your damage throughput. There's a lot of other things that you can do to optimize this further and squeeze more throughput out. But if you're relatively new to the spec or this iteration of the spec, I think focusing on this core rotation when starting a pull, recognizing your buffs and recognizing the rhythm of multi-dotting and Lashing Flames, just focusing on this will net you much greater results sooner than focusing on very detailed and nuanced min-maxing. Remember, the goal of this guide isn't to make you rip Enhance out in the MDI, it's just to get you from knowing very little to performing very well in your weekly keys, and that's it. Now moving on to more extra credit things. Enhance has a metric shit ton of utility, and if you have the average DPS main's monkey brain, you might want to click off at this point in the guide. However, remember what I said earlier, Enhance is heavily punished when it loses uptime or when the mobs are spread out, such as when a pack is spread because mobs are casting. So using your utility, even if they consume a global that you could have used on damage, may end up raising your overall DPS and speeding up the key. So firstly, you're a Bloodlust class and a party buff class, so welcome to the blue class gang. You will get invited to keys just for being blue, so make sure you know or simply ask groups where they want Bloodlust, don't just rip it randomly, and keep your Wind Fury totem up, or people will moan in your ear the entire key. Next, you have an extremely fast interrupt, the fastest in the game, and you have an offensive perch as well as a friendly curse dispel. If you're not using all of these buttons at all times, it's a good way to testify that you're trash. You should easily have the highest interrupts in a dungeon, and when there are curses or abilities that you can purge, you should be rivaling other DPS or maybe even the healer in the metric of dispels. Next, you're incredibly survivable, like stupid levels of survivable. And remember, you don't do damage when you're dead on the ground. Earth Ellie can help your tank by taunting mobs, and it gives you a lot of HP via a conduit. And your main defensive button is going to be Astral Shift. It's a 40% damage reduction on a 90-second cooldown, which is extremely strong. Healing Stream Totem is also good to drop in times of high healing pressure. This is not going to occur much if you cap out at just plus 15 keys. And again, you won't do damage if you're literally part of the environment, so better to drop it than not. And if you're really going to die, or maybe the healer is dead and the group is dying, you can build 5 Maelstrom and spend it to make Healing Surge or Chain Heal instant. I still prefer Healing Surge. Now note, this will still use your mana, so you can only do 3 or 4 of these before you're drained, but it's an extreme amount of healing out of a DPS class should you need to do it. Other than that, you have Hex, which is a long CC on humanoids or beasts. This is niche use, you probably won't use it a lot in especially random pug keys, but it can be helpful if a mob that was previously CC'd breaks. But we're in Shadowlands and fucking half the mobs are undead, so again, you won't use this a lot. You have a slow totem called Earthbind, you have a stun totem called Cap Totem, and then you have Tremor Totem, which you can drop prior to a fear and it will then dispel that fear. Now it's a very small window, so don't drop it too far in advance, but like on the Miss first boss when he's casting the fear, you can drop the totem and then it will dispel anyone who has the fear if they're nearby. The final mention is Fleshcraft, as you are a Necrolord. But Fleshcraft is more than just a shield for you. Because you're running Merilith, your Fleshcraft is super juiced up. It will always give you a chunk of mastery for 2 minutes after you use it, and due to ultimate form, while channeling Fleshcraft, and if you channel the full duration for 3 seconds after even, you're immune to all crowd control. This can be used to cheese, avoid, or skip so many things. Nearly every single boss fight trash pack in the entire expansion right now has something that you can Fleshcraft, either survive it by yourself or completely negate for the entire group. Any boss mechanic with a fear, grip, stun, you can Fleshcraft to just completely avoid it. So just keep an eye out for this, and remember, it's full CC immunity. Now there are exceptions in that sometimes when a boss moves you around or picks you up and teleports you, it's technically not crowd control, it's a server side action and it's not exactly a spell, but you'll learn that as you try it on different things. But I think that pretty much wraps it up. Again, use this guide as a starting point. You might still be total ass until you run a few keys, so don't worry about that. And remember, there's a lot more that you can do that I have not mentioned here to squeeze out more optimal play and more throughput. So keep your eyes and mind open. Good luck. Later.